What happens when a diner on the brink of closing becomes the heart of a community? A snowstorm, a handful of strangers, and an unexpected act of kindness set the stage for a life-changing transformation. This is the story of Sarah Miller, a woman who fought to keep her husband's dream alive and found herself at the center of a legacy that would change everything. Stay tuned to see how one night, filled with truckers, stories, and warmth, became the turning point for a diner and a woman on the edge of giving up. Before we jump into this heartwarming story, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy uplifting tales like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss tomorrow's inspiring video. Sarah Miller stood behind the counter of Miller's Roadside Cafe, the small diner that had once been the heart of Highway 56. For over 30 years, her late husband, John, had run the place with pride, serving truckers, travelers, and locals alike. The cafe had been a second home to countless weary souls, offering them a warm meal and a hot cup of coffee on long journeys. Now, at 42, Sarah found herself alone, carrying the weight of a business that was slowly fading away. After John's sudden heart attack 5 years ago, Sarah promised him she'd keep the cafe going. But when the state rerouted the highway 10 miles east, business took a nosedive. Travelers who used to stop by now passed by without a second glance. And though Sarah tried to keep the diner open, it was no use. The bills piled up, and the bank had started sending warnings. Tonight, with the snowstorm rolling in, Sarah was ready to close up. She glanced at the clock, 6:45 p.m., and sighed. Her earnings for the day amounted to $150, barely enough to cover the utilities, let alone the overdue rent. But as the wind howled outside and the snow began to fall harder, Sarah wasn't sure if tonight would be like every other night, or if something unexpected would change everything. The door jingled with the sharp sound of wind as a man stepped into Miller's Roadside Cafe, stomping snow from his boots. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face marked by years on the road. He wore a trucker cap pulled low over his eyes and a heavy jacket covered in snowflakes. He glanced around the empty diner before his eyes landed on Sarah behind the counter. "Evening, ma'am," he said in a deep, gravelly voice, as though years of cigarettes and the open road had etched the roughness into his tone. "Any chance you're still serving? It's a mess out there." Sarah looked at the clock, 6:55 p.m., and hesitated. Normally, she would have flipped the closed sign by now and started cleaning up. But tonight, something felt different. She had a sense that this night wouldn't be like the others. "The kitchen's still open for a few minutes," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "What can I get you?" The man smiled, settling onto a stool at the counter. "Coffee, black, and whatever's hot. Name's Mark. Appreciate you being open. They've closed the highway about 10 miles back. Complete whiteout conditions." Sarah froze for a moment, coffee pot still in hand. "Close the highway? How long?" "Till morning, at least," Mark replied, shrugging his broad shoulders. "Lucky to make it this far before they blocked it off. Looks like we're stuck here for the night." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened again. 2 more truckers walked in, brushing snow from their coats and shaking the cold off their shoulders. Then, another 3. By 7:30 p.m., Sarah found herself serving a small group of 6 truckers, each one desperate for warmth and food. The diner, once silent and abandoned, was now filled with the low hum of voices. Sarah's usual evening routine was completely forgotten as she worked behind the counter, brewing pot after pot of coffee and flipping pancakes as fast as she could. "Jenny," Sarah called to her young waitress, who had just finished wiping down the last table. "Check the freezer, will you? We're running low on everything." Jenny, a lanky 22-year-old with a friendly smile and a no-nonsense attitude, nodded and disappeared into the back. Sarah didn't blame her for showing up tonight, even though the storm had made it dangerous. The weather was bad, but she had been determined not to leave Sarah to handle the diner alone. "How about you guys?" Sarah asked, looking around at the truckers. Planning to head out once you're done eating? No ma'am, Mark answered, shaking his head. Highway patrol says nothing's moving till morning. All the motels in town are full. Looks like we're sleeping in our rigs tonight. Sarah peered outside. The snow was coming down so thick she could barely see the outlines of the trucks parked in the lot. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and the wind howled around the diner's windows. It was far too cold to sleep in their trucks. You can't stay in your rigs in this, Sarah said before she could stop herself. You'll freeze. One of the truckers chuckled, but Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. Most of the rigs weren't built to idle all night in these kinds of temperatures. The heating systems couldn't handle it. I know how it is, Mark said quietly, his gaze distant. But we've all done it before. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She thought of the mounting bills, the foreclosure notices, the last of her supplies dwindling. And then she thought of John, who had spent 15 years as a trucker before they had enough to buy the cafe. She thought of the kindness they had shown to fellow truckers on the road, how John always offered help without expecting anything in return. The words escaped her before she could stop them. You can't sleep in your trucks tonight. I've got an apartment upstairs, and I've got blankets. It's not much, but it's warm. Mark looked at her, surprised. You do that for a bunch of strangers? Sarah's eyes softened as she looked at the photo of John behind the counter, his young face grinning as he stood proudly next to his rig. My husband would never turn away a driver in need, she said quietly. And neither will I. As the hours passed, the storm outside intensified. The power flickered and then went out, but Sarah kept the diner running by candlelight. She was determined to make sure these truckers had everything they needed. It was after midnight when Mark, sensing her exhaustion, offered to look at the old heating system in the back. He spent 20 minutes tinkering with the furnace, and when it finally came back to life, Sarah couldn't help but feel a small glimmer of hope. By the time the clock hit 1 a.m., Sarah had exhausted nearly every scrap of food in the diner. The truckers had eaten the last of her soup, sandwiches, and even the small stash of snacks she kept for herself. But no one seemed to mind. They kept talking, sharing stories about the road, about their families, and about the countless times they'd been helped by a fellow driver, especially in storms like this one. For the first time in months, Sarah found herself laughing. The conversations flowed easily, and the diner, which had been an empty shell just a few hours ago, now felt alive. The truckers were more than just customers, they were guests, and she found herself genuinely enjoying their company. It felt good, being surrounded by people who cared, even if just for one night. But as much as Sarah wanted to ignore it, the reality of her situation loomed large. She glanced at the small pile of bills on the counter, final notices from the bank, electricity bills, and the last warning about the rent. If she couldn't find a way to turn things around soon, she'd lose the diner, and everything her husband John had worked for. The snowstorm outside was relentless, and it felt like the world was closing in. At around 2 a.m., when the diner was finally quieting down, Mark approached Sarah. His face was serious, his normally cheerful demeanor replaced with concern. You okay? He asked, his deep voice quieter than before. You've been running on fumes all night. Sarah forced a smile. I'll be fine. It's just, things have been tough here, lately. The highway change, the bills, the bank. Her voice trailed off as she gestured vaguely to the piles of paperwork and the nearly empty shelves behind the counter. I don't know how much longer I can keep this place open. Mark nodded, clearly understanding. He had been around long enough to recognize the signs of a business in trouble. But he didn't say anything, just watched Sarah for a moment as if weighing something in his mind. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, You ever think about selling this place? Sarah's heart sank. She had thought about it, but never really let herself entertain the idea. Selling meant giving up everything she and John had worked for. It meant letting go of the only thing she had left of him. I've tried, she said quietly. But no one wants it. Who wants a diner on a road that barely gets any traffic anymore? Mark paused, then gave her a small, knowing smile. Funny thing about roads, they can change direction in an instant. But that doesn't mean the people who need you are going to just disappear. I think you've got something here, Sarah. This place. It means more than just a stop for food. Sarah wasn't sure what to say, so she just nodded. The night was beginning to feel like a dream, a strange, surreal experience that was both exhausting and strangely uplifting. She thought about the kindness these strangers had shown, the way they'd come together, even in the worst conditions, to support each other. It reminded her so much of John, of his belief in helping others without expecting anything in return. Just then, the door to the diner opened again with the jingle of the bell, and another trucker entered, shaking off the snow. Behind him, the sound of more engines echoed through the night. Mark turned and gave Sarah a reassuring look before heading toward the door to greet the new arrivals. Sarah watched as a procession of trucks pulled into the diner's parking lot, filling the space with a row of headlights cutting through the snow. It was surreal, almost like a parade of trucks, all gathered at her diner in the middle of nowhere, in the midst of a storm. The trucks began to line up on the road outside, one after another, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The trucks continued to pull into the lot, their headlights slicing through the snow like beacons of light in the storm. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had expected a quiet night, maybe a handful of truckers taking refuge from the blizzard. But this was something entirely different. Mark had stepped outside to greet the new arrivals, and soon, the diner was filled with the unmistakable rumble of more voices, more laughter, and more stories of life on the road. The atmosphere had shifted from one of desperation to one of community. The truckers weren't just stranded. They were united by a shared experience, by the recognition of a place that had welcomed them when they needed it most. As the night wore on, Sarah watched from behind the counter, listening to the truckers talk about her late husband, John. She hadn't expected this. She had known John as a kind and hardworking man, but hearing these stories of him helping fellow truckers on the road, guiding them through storms and breakdowns, made her see him in a new light. To them, John wasn't just a diner owner. He was a legend, a hero on the road, a man who had made a difference in ways she had never fully understood. One by one, the truckers shared their stories. Some spoke of how John had saved them from dangerous situations, others of how he had simply listened when they needed someone to talk to. It was clear that John's kindness had rippled far beyond their small town, touching people from all over the country. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she listened, but she didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. These stories spoke volumes about the man she had loved and lost. Then, as the conversation shifted back to the diner and the highway's changes, Sarah heard something that made her heart skip a beat. Mark had returned to the counter, a serious look on his face. "You know, Sarah," he said, pausing as if searching for the right words. "This place, your diner, it's got more history than you realize. More value than just a meal and a cup of coffee. You're not just serving food here. You're carrying on John's legacy." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" Mark leaned in a little closer, his eyes thoughtful. "I mean, your diner isn't just a stop on the road for people. It's a refuge. A place that reminds folks of what kindness looks like on the open road. That's what your husband built here. And that's something special." Sarah felt a surge of emotion. She had spent so much time thinking about her financial struggles, her bills, and the looming possibility of losing the diner. But she hadn't thought about it like this. She hadn't thought about the history, the community, the legacy that John had left behind. The diner wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of connection, of helping people when they needed it most. "I never thought about it that way," Sarah admitted quietly, her voice catching. "I've been so focused on trying to keep the doors open, trying to survive. I never realized how much this place means to people." Mark smiled, his eyes softening. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. You've got more people rooting for you than you realize." The sound of laughter and conversation filled the diner, and Sarah took a moment to look around at the truckers who had become so much more than customers. They were a part of something bigger now, a community bound by shared experiences and a deep appreciation for the kindness of strangers. Sarah realized, in that moment, that she wasn't just running a diner. She was carrying on a tradition that John had started, a tradition of helping others, of providing a safe haven on the road, no matter the circumstances. As the storm raged on outside, Sarah found herself swept up in a wave of emotion and gratitude. The warmth of the diner felt almost surreal, the noise of laughter and stories filling the space in a way that hadn't happened in years. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, she had been preparing to close the doors for good. Now, thanks to the unexpected arrival of the truckers and their generous stories, it felt like something had shifted, like the universe was giving her a second chance. But just as she was beginning to believe that things might actually turn around, Mark pulled her aside. His serious expression returned, and there was a gleam of determination in his eyes. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something." She glanced at him, confused but intrigued. "What's going on?" Mark glanced toward the group of truckers in the diner, who were still sharing stories and talking amongst themselves. He lowered his voice a little. "It's about your diner. I don't think you realize just how much potential you have here. This place, your husband's legacy, there's something more to it than just serving a cup of coffee." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She had never thought of it that way. To her, it had just been a place to make ends meet, a way to hold on to something that had once been her husband's dream. But Mark was right, there was something more. This was a place where people found comfort, where strangers became friends, and where John's kindness lived on. Mark continued, his voice low but urgent. "I've been talking with some of the other truckers, and we've all agreed, this place needs to stay open. You've got a solid spot here. We travel this route all the time, and we need a place to stop that's more than just a gas station with a snack machine. We need somewhere that feels like home. Your diner. It could be that place." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You really think so?" "I do," Mark replied, nodding. "But it's going to take more than just you and me. It's going to take everyone who's ever been helped by this place. Your husband's legacy has touched more people than you could ever imagine." Before Sarah could respond, Mark turned to the truckers, who had begun to gather around him. They were looking at Sarah with smiles on their faces, their eyes filled with a kind of understanding that only comes from having shared the road with someone for years. One by one, they stepped forward, and Sarah felt the weight of their gestures sink into her chest. "We've all been talking," said one of the older truckers, his weathered face serious. "We want to help keep this place alive. We'll make sure word gets out. You're not alone in this, Sarah. We've got your back." As Sarah stood there, stunned and overwhelmed by their support, another man, dressed in a smart suit rather than a trucker's uniform, stepped forward. He extended a hand toward Sarah with a confident smile. "Mrs. Miller," he began, "I'm William Porter, Regional Manager for Porter Hall Trucking. We have 50 rigs that run this route regularly, and I can assure you, we need a place like this, somewhere our drivers can rest, eat, and feel like they're part of a community, not just a number on a schedule. I'd like to work with you to set up a regular stop here for our fleet." Sarah felt her heart race. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for, but never thought would come. A partnership with one of the biggest trucking companies in the region? It felt like a dream. "I'd be happy to discuss how we can make this work," Sarah said, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. "This place, Miller's Roadside Cafe, has been in my family for over 30 years. I want to make sure it stays open, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever passed through here." William smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. "Then let's make it happen. We'll help you get back on your feet. Word will spread fast. I'm confident this will become a key stop for drivers all across the country." As the group of truckers gathered around, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of relief. They were offering not just money or resources, but something much more valuable, a community, a sense of belonging, and a chance to keep her husband's dream alive. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Believe it," Mark said, giving her a gentle nudge. "You've got something special here, Sarah. And now, so do we." With that, the truckers began to file out, but not without offering one last piece of support. Donations, cash from drivers and trucking companies who had heard about Sarah's hospitality during the storm, were handed to her, enough to help her cover the overdue bills and restock her supplies. As the last of the truckers pulled away into the night, Sarah stood there, looking out at the snow-covered parking lot, which had once been so empty and now seemed full of potential. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to believe in a future, one where Miller's Roadside Cafe wasn't just a memory of the past, but a place that would continue to serve the people who needed it most. In the weeks that followed the storm, Sarah's world began to change in ways she hadn't thought possible. Word of Miller's Roadside Cafe spread quickly among the trucking community, and with it came a steady stream of drivers, eager for a place that felt like home after long hours on the road. The partnership with Porter Hull Trucking was official, and soon enough, their fleet was stopping by regularly. The diner, once a quiet, nearly forgotten spot, became a bustling hub of activity. For Sarah, it was a whirlwind. She found herself juggling the day-to-day of running a successful diner again, but now she had a whole new set of responsibilities. It wasn't just about keeping the coffee flowing and the plates full, it was about managing a team, maintaining relationships with the truckers, and ensuring that the diner lived up to the legacy of kindness that John had started. She hired more staff, including Jenny, the young waitress who had stuck with her during the darkest days. Together, they worked long hours, but the diner was alive with energy, filled with laughter, and constant chatter from the truckers who came in to share stories and rest. There were days when Sarah felt exhausted, but the satisfaction of knowing she was making a difference, not just in her own life but in the lives of the people around her, kept her going. The hardest part, however, was adjusting to the idea that she wasn't alone anymore. For years, Sarah had shouldered the burden of the diner by herself, believing that the weight of it all was hers to carry. But now, she realized, it wasn't just her anymore. It was a community, a family of truckers, staff, and neighbors who supported each other in ways that transcended the walls of the diner. One afternoon, as Sarah stood behind the counter, refilling coffee mugs, she overheard two truckers talking about their latest trip. One of them was a young driver, just starting out, and the other was an older man with a weathered face, one Sarah recognized from the first night of the storm. "You know," the older trucker was saying, "I've been doing this for over 30 years. But I've never found a place like this. It's not just about the food, though, I've gotta say, Sarah makes the best burgers on this route, but it's the people. This diner? It's more than just a stop. It's a lifeline." Sarah froze for a moment, surprised by the depth of his words. She'd always seen the diner as a place to serve meals and offer a rest stop, but hearing it described as a lifeline made her realize how much she had underestimated its impact. The diner wasn't just about business, it was about connection. It was a place where truckers could share their stories, take a breath, and feel like they mattered. It was a place where Sarah's kindness and the legacy of her husband were woven into the very fabric of the community. Later that evening, Mark stopped by the diner to check in. He noticed the way Sarah seemed more at ease, more confident, and with a smile that didn't seem forced. "You've come a long way," Mark said, offering her a knowing look. "When we first met, you were running on empty. Now, you've got a full tank." Sarah chuckled, wiping down the counter. "I didn't think it was possible, honestly. But somehow, we've made it work." Mark nodded, his eyes twinkling. "You've done more than that. You've built something here. Something that matters." The words hung in the air for a moment as Sarah processed them. She had built something, yes. But it wasn't just her, it was everyone who had come together to make it happen. The truckers, the community, and even the legacy of John. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And that was a realization that would carry her forward for years to come. 6 months after the storm that changed everything, Miller's roadside cafe was nearly unrecognizable. The once quiet, nearly empty diner was now thriving, bustling with truckers, locals, and travelers who had heard about the place. The parking lot had expanded to accommodate the steady flow of trucks that now filled it each day. The diner was no longer just a pit stop, it was a destination, a sanctuary for those on the road. Sarah had paid off the mortgage, thanks to the donations and support from the trucking community. The diner was stocked with fresh supplies, and the staff had grown from just Sarah and Jenny to a small, dedicated team. The menu had expanded, the coffee flowed constantly, and the stories of truckers who had stopped there over the years filled the air with warmth. There was even a small lounge area now, complete with showers for drivers who needed to rest. The most significant change, though, was the CB radio. The old base unit that Sarah had kept on the counter ever since John passed away had come back to life. Now, Sarah used it regularly to update truckers on weather conditions, road closures, and to share the occasional word of encouragement. It was a small way of keeping John's spirit alive, just as he had done so many times during his years on the road. One evening, after the dinner rush had slowed, Sarah sat down at the counter, exhausted but content. She watched Jenny serving coffee to a new group of truckers at the corner booth, their laughter filling the air. As Sarah sipped her own coffee, she couldn't help but smile. The diner was a living, breathing testament to the power of community, to the idea that sometimes, the things we think are lost can come back in unexpected ways. It was on this night, exactly 1 year after the blizzard, that Sarah made a decision. As she stood in front of the counter, wiping it down with a cloth, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A new photograph hung on the wall behind her. It was a picture of Sarah, surrounded by dozens of truckers, the very ones who had returned that snowy night with their surprise. They were all smiling, their faces bright with warmth, the sense of camaraderie in the air almost palpable. Beneath the photo was a small plaque that read, "Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who shows up when the road gets rough." Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she stared at the photo. It was a moment captured in time, a moment that symbolized everything that had changed for her in the past year. She wasn't just running a diner anymore. She was part of something bigger, a community that had been built on kindness, generosity, and the spirit of helping one another. This was her new family. Just as Sarah wiped away a tear, the bell above the door jingled, signaling the arrival of a new trucker. The man, in his early 20s, looked around and then made his way to the counter, where Sarah greeted him with a warm smile. "First time here?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the trucker replied, taking a seat. "I've heard this place is legendary on the route. Had to stop by." Sarah grinned. "Well, welcome to Miller's Roadside Cafe. Coffee's on the house for first-timers. What brings you out on the road today?" As the young man began to share his story, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. This was exactly where she was meant to be, right here, behind the counter, surrounded by the people who had become her family. The road had changed for everyone. The highway may have been rerouted, and the path ahead had been uncertain, but in the end, Sarah had found exactly what she needed. She had found purpose, community, and a place where kindness still mattered. And in that moment, Sarah realized that sometimes, when life takes you down a road you never expected, it can lead you exactly where you're supposed to be. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments can lead to the greatest transformations. Sarah's story teaches us that kindness and community have the power to heal and rebuild what seems lost. Even when facing hardship, giving without expecting anything in return can create ripples of positive change that we may never fully understand. In our daily lives, we may face challenges that seem insurmountable. But by leaning into the support of others, staying true to our values, and offering help when we can, we often find strength we didn't know we had, and opportunities we didn't expect. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories of kindness and perseverance. And tell us, what's the most unexpected act of kindness you've experienced? We'd love to hear your story.